Justing Gaethje versus Paddy Pimblett will not be close. January 24th, 2026, the first card of the Paramount era, Justing Gaethje versus Paddy Pimblett is the main event for the interim lightweight championship of the UFC. Now, this being the first card of the Paramount era, this is a huge deal for Justing Gaethje and Paddy Pimblett to be main eventing it. And for better or for worse, this is what the UFC decided to put on for the lightweight championship. We know Ilia Topuria has stepped away from the UFC for at least the first quarter of 2026. I made a whole video on that the other week, so you guys could go check that video out after this one. But in this video, you guys know the drill. I'm going to go through the recent history of each fighter, talk about their fighting styles and how they match up against each other, and then in the end, I will give a prediction and breakdown for how this fight will go. You guys already know these are all bangers. I mean, look at the Khamzat Chimaev one, look at the Islam Makhachev one. Like, we're hitting on these. We are telling you guys what's going to happen. Even look at the Max Holloway one. We know what we're talking about here. So if you guys want to see the best UFC videos every single week, we post 2 to 3 times a week, you might as well hit that subscribe button. We are almost at 1,500 subscribers. And we are trying to get there by the end of 2026, so every single subscribe matters. But with that being said, let's get right into this video. You'll want to stay till the end because that's where the prediction is. But let's first look at Justing Gaethje's side of things. So for Justing Gaethje, he is 37 years old. That being said, his better days are behind him. Nonetheless, he's still a good fighter in the UFC because we just saw in his last fight last year, he beat Rafael Fiziev, and that fight's aging well because Rafael just won his fight and is now moving up the lightweight rankings, so that's only making Justing Gaethje look better, and the win is seeming more and more legit as time does pass. However, his better days are behind him. We know he suffered a loss to Max Holloway at UFC 300. You, I, and the rest of the MMA world all saw that knockout the last second of the fight. It was a brutal knockout, and Justing Gaethje took over a year off, came back, beat Fiziev, and now going into next year, early 2026, he's looking to become the lightweight champion once again. If you guys do remember, he was champion at one point in time, but he lost his belt shortly after gaining it by beating Ferguson. He lost it to none other than Khabib Nurmagomedov. And his other fights in the UFC come to Oliveira, Eddie Alvarez, Dustin Poirier, and Max Holloway. These are all guys, maybe except Eddie Alvarez, that I do have ranked higher than Justing Gaethje, but I do have Gaethje closely right behind him, right around the same range as Max Holloway and Dustin Poirier when we're comparing their primes and their UFC careers. Now his wins, he also beat Dustin Poirier, he beat Fiziev twice, Donald Cerrone, he beat Barboza. He has a lot of good wins on his resume here. And like I said, he was champion at one point, and his most recent fight against Rafael Fiziev, the win it was, we will break that fight more down in 1 minute, because the deeper you dive into it, it actually becomes pretty interesting and tells us a lot about Justing, as well as how he's going to do against Paddy Pimblett and how this fight may play out. But with that being said, let's look at Paddy Pimblett's side of things. So unlike Justing Gaethje, Paddy Pimblett is still in his prime. It's actually the peak of his prime. He is 30 years old right now, undefeated in the UFC. And as far as the style goes, Justing Gaethje is a very dangerous and powerful striker where he doesn't really wrestle or grapple, go for submissions really ever. But Paddy Pimblett, on the other hand, is very well-rounded. He doesn't have one single legendary thing about him, like how Oliveira has his submissions, Khabib and Islam Makhachev have their wrestling, Topuria has his power in boxing, even Gaethje has his power. Gaethje doesn't have any of that. Instead, he's just pretty good everywhere. He doesn't really have a weak spot, but he doesn't really specialize, and he's not really legendary in just one thing. So he's kind of a Swiss Army knife. You know, that means he could just do it all. Like, he could get a win by knockout, by submission, by decision. He really is just applicable in all areas of MMA, very well-rounded. Now, as for his opponents, his first few fights in the UFC were against guys who don't have huge names. They were never great fighters in the UFC. Obviously, you have to be a great MMA fighter to get to the UFC, but these are pretty much more or less just your unranked fighters. Not a big deal beating them. They're guys you're expected to beat if you're going to be a big star or any name in the sport. You know, Bedtime MMA would call them a bunch of nobodies, and these guys are kind of cans. Maybe Paddy Pimblett was the can crusher at one point. Maybe he still is, because let's look at the names that we recognize on his resume. The first one we're going to look at, this was the first hyped up name that he did beat, and this was none other than Tony Ferguson. We all love Tony Ferguson, and beating him at one point in time would be very impressive. However, that point in time is about 10 years ago from today. This fight, however, only took place maybe 2 years ago, and he beat a Tony Ferguson who was 39 years old at the time. About 10 years older than Paddy Pimblett. Pretty crazy. He's 9 years older than him. And at that time, Tony was on a 6-fight losing streak, and we all know that Tony should have been retired for years now by the time this fight came about. But nonetheless, Paddy did what he was supposed to do and did beat him. It's just not that impressive of a win in my books. Now looking at his next opponent, it was Bobby Green at the time. Now he's known as King Green. He beat him, but Bobby Green, here we go, 37 years old. Another unk of the sport, still fighting, basically near retirement at this stage. Although, crazy story, he was on an 0-2 losing streak, and then he just won last night. So, pretty crazy you're losing to King Green in the big 2-5, but let's carry on down the line. And you guys know King Green was never that great of a UFC fighter. He's always been solid, but he's never been like a top 5 guy ever competing for a belt. But Paddy beat him as he was supposed to. Going on to his next opponent, we have none other than the legend himself, Michael Chandler. Michael Chandler, do I even need to tell you guys his age at the time they fought? Well, I'll tell you guys. It was 38, and he was 0-2 going into that fight, and he was only 2-5 in the UFC. He has lost over twice as many fights in the UFC as he has won. That is just absolutely ridiculous, but again, Paddy Pimblett does what he's supposed to do, goes in and beats him. And he did that in all these fights, as he was supposed to do. But my point I'm getting at here is, yes, he has these names on a resume, but none of them are really that impressive names, especially when you take in the age into consideration at the age he's beating these guys. I mean, it kind of reminds me of Jake Paul when he's fighting Anderson Silva and Tyron Woodley out here. It's like, why are we picking on all these old guys? Let's get a good matchup. And here we kind of have a better one. But if you look at him versus Justing Gaethje also is now 37 years old. Like, he's fighting all these guys after their prime. It's exactly what Jake Paul's doing, fighting this old Mike Tyson. Obviously, this isn't that bad. But still, if you fought these guys 4 years ago, now I know Paddy's younger, so it's like, how could he even do that? But we want to see fights with Paddy like Arman Tsarukyan, Ilia Topuria, Max Holloway. Fight these guys who are in their primes. Even Charles Oliveira, who I reckon's on the backstage of his prime. A fight like that would be way more impressive than what we're doing right now, beating these old guys. I mean, you could have even fought someone like Gamrot, but that's just not what we've chose to do. And I don't know that I could blame it all on Paddy. Actually, I really don't, because if I'm Paddy and the UFC's giving me these big names, but they're names of guys who are past their prime, but I know it's still big for my career if I beat them, I'm taking those fights. I'm not going to fight these young up-and-comers who are my age, very good in their primes like Benoit Saint Denis. I'm not fighting these guys. I'm taking these easy fights. I'm taking Tony Ferguson. I'm taking Michael Chandler. I'm taking Bobby Green. So I can't blame Paddy for that, but I'm just going to call a spade, and the UFC has given him the easiest cakewalk to a championship that I've ever seen. Now, obviously, there are other easier paths, like maybe Sean O'Malley, even though he beat a Petr Yan, or even someone like Alex Pereira. Sped ran middleweight because of his feud with Israel Adesanya, but he still had to beat someone like Adesanya. And his light heavyweight run, he's beating all these big names too. But Paddy Pimblett is facing all these guys who are out of their prime. And the big question we have to ask ourselves going into this fight, how you could really boil this down, is Justing Gaethje's last win over Rafael Fiziev was over decision. And when I told you guys we're going to talk about it, let's talk about it real quick. So Justing Gaethje got knocked out at UFC 300 in 2023. That was in the spring, takes the rest of the year off. Spring of next year, he was scheduled to fight Dan Hooker. This was going to be a crazy fight. Dan Hooker pulls out, so who does Justing Gaethje fight? He fights Rafael Fiziev. Still a striker, but Fiziev took this fight on short notice. I get Gaethje did too, but he's preparing for the same style, just another striker. Obviously, there's differences in size and specific style, but it's not a wrestler. It's a striker. Someone like Oliveira switched from Fiziev, a striker, to a wrestler like Gamrot last minute and still got it done and looked very impressive doing so. So Gaethje keeping the same styles makes it even easier for him. And it gets even easier when you look at Rafael Fiziev himself was out of the UFC for 1.5 years due to an injury he had. So he was very rusty, not in prime fighting shape, and he was not even ranked in the top 10 at the time of this fight if my memory serves me correctly. So this is a win Justing Gaethje should be getting, and he did get the win, but it was by decision, and it was a pretty close fight. Fiziev was catching him, Gaethje was catching Fiziev. It was not a one-sided fight, and that is the problem because this was a decision win. And what this fight boils down to is Paddy Pimblett that much better than Rafael Fiziev, where he could either flip the decision the other way on the scorecard to where Paddy beats Justin or just straight up finishes him within the first 5 rounds. That is what this comes down to, is Paddy that much better than Rafael Fiziev to where he could beat Gaethje, or is he not? That Fiziev version was better than anybody that Paddy Pimblett's faced in the UFC, but I also think Paddy's better than Fiziev, But because of the competition and who they fought, the only way to find out is with them fighting each other. And that is what we get to see at UFC 324. And now we will get into my prediction. And don't forget to hit subscribe for 2 to 3 high quality UFC videos every single week. About to hit 1,500 subscribers. But let's get right into this prediction. And how I see this fight going is I have Paddy Pimblett winning. I know I just spent a good few minutes talking about how none of Paddy Pimblett's wins are impressive. And I still stand by that. He still beat old guys. He still did a Jake Paul route to the top. And with that high praise I gave Justing Gaethje for being a good striker and having these wins, being a former champion, you might be like, Travis, well, stick to your logic. You think he should beat him then? No, I don't. Because Justing Gaethje is 37 years old, and I think Justing Gaethje at 37 loses to a prime Paddy Pimblett 7 years younger in the peak of his prime. I do think if this fight goes down in their prime, that Pimblett does lose to Justing Gaethje. It's hard to say by knockout or decision. I would want to say knockout. But Paddy Pimblett's never been knocked out, so it's really hard to say how good his chin truly is, especially when he's fighting these guys who are either super old or not very good in the first place. But in their prime, I do think Gaethje beats Paddy Pimblett. I just don't think that Gaethje is in his prime or close enough to his prime right now to where he beats a prime Paddy Pimblett. I do see this fight either going the distance or Paddy getting a finish. And like I said, and wow, that's probably the ultimate fence sit right there. But Paddy Pimblett is really well-rounded. I think if he gets it to the ground, he can submit Gaethje. I think he is very well-rounded on the ground. But Gaethje's shakedown defense is good, so I think the only way he gets to the ground is if he gets him rocked and then he goes for a takedown or a trip, or maybe he just knocks him down and then jumps on top of him. We don't know. We will have to see how this plays out. But my prediction is that Paddy Pimblett does win at UFC 324. And as crazy as it is, that will be the easiest cakewalk to becoming a UFC champion that I have ever seen as far as just strength of opponents goes. I think he's had an easy schedule, and I think that his fight against Topuria, which should happen in the summer next year in the UFC, will be a very big wake-up call, and that will be the true test. Not UFC 324. It will be Paddy versus Topuria that really tells us how good Paddy Pimblett is. And all this happens while the true #1 contender Arman Tsarukyan sits on the sidelines. And it's just very unfortunate to see. And that's a whole nother thing that we'll have to make a video about. So subscribe to see that. Thank you for watching this far. Comment down below who you think wins, Justing Gaethje or Paddy Pimblett. And tell me why, because I'm interested to hear your opinion. But with that being said, I'll see you guys later this week in the next video. Deuces.